guy never said a single word to me, not one. He just stood there with his face against the glass and waited. I've worked at McGinty's Tap Room for 3 years. It's a small Irish pub on the corner of Hadley Street in Covington, Kentucky. The kind of place with sticky floors and the same 4 songs on the jukebox since 2009. I like it there. I like the regulars. I like that it's predictable. St. Patrick's Day is the one night that ruins all of that. We stop taking new customers at midnight. Bar closes at 2 a.m., and by the time I'm actually alone in there, sweeping up, it's usually close to 3. That's where this starts. 2:58 a.m., March 18th. Technically, the day after. The last customer had left maybe 40 minutes before. My manager, Derek, dipped out around 2:30 to go pick up his girlfriend from another bar downtown. He asked if I was okay to close alone. I said, yeah, of course. I'd done it a dozen times. The front door was locked, deadbolt and chain. I had checked it twice. I was behind the bar, wiping down the countertops. The overhead lights were off. I just had the low track lighting on above the bar, so I could see what I was doing. From the street, the place probably looked dark. That's probably why he stopped. I didn't notice him at first. I had my earbuds in one side, half listening to a podcast. I was focused on getting the glasses rinsed and stacked before I mopped. Then something made me look up. I don't know what it was. A shadow shift. Some peripheral thing my brain caught before I consciously registered it. He was standing on the sidewalk right up against the front window. And I mean right up against it. His face maybe 2 inches from the glass. He was wearing a green t-shirt. The cheap kind, the kiss me I'm Irish kind. Except it was soaked. Not just from sweat. Like he had been rained on or had fallen in something. It clung to him in a way that looked wrong. He had one of those plastic shamrock bead necklaces on. The beads were broken and half of them were missing, hanging off him like a frayed rope. His eyes were open. That's what got me. Not the outfit. Not even the fact that he was just standing there at 3 a.m. with his face against my window. His eyes were open, but they weren't tracking anything. They were pointed in my direction, but not seeing me, or seeing through me. I genuinely could not tell if he was conscious. I pulled out my earbud. I waited for him to do something. Knock. Wave. Mouth something through the glass. He just stood there. I told myself he was just some drunk guy who had wandered away from the bar district and stopped to rest. Covington gets that on St. Patrick's Day. People end up places they don't remember walking to. I went back to wiping down the bar. 30 seconds later, I heard it. One knock. Not aggressive, not frantic. Just one single knock, low on the glass, like he had barely lifted his hand to do it. I looked up again. He was in the exact same position, face against the glass, eyes forward. I held up one finger. The universal 1-second gesture. Then I pointed at the door and shook my head slowly. Closed. Done. Go home. He didn't react. I went back to stacking glasses. 2 minutes passed, maybe 3. Then he knocked again. Same spot. Same low, flat knock. One time, I stopped what I was doing. I set the glass down and just watched him. His mouth was slightly open. I could see, or thought I could see, something wet on his chin. I told myself it was rain. I told myself a lot of things in those next few minutes. I said loudly enough to carry through the glass, "We're closed. You need to go home." Nothing. Not a nod. Not a blink. Not any acknowledgement that he had heard sound come out of another human being, standing 8 feet away from him. That's when the feeling shifted. Because up until that point, even with the weirdness, I had been running the script in my head. Drunk guy just needs to get his bearings. He'll wander off. That script has a logic to it. Drunk people do drunk things. They're unpredictable, but they're still human-shaped in how they move and respond. This guy wasn't running that script. He knocked again, still just once. Still the same flat, low knock. I picked up my phone and texted Derek. Hey, there's a weird guy at the front window, not responding when I talk to him. Kind of freaking me out. Derek's response came 4 minutes later. LOL, call non-emergency. If he doesn't leave, I'm like 20 minutes out. I looked back at the window. He had moved. Not away from the door. He had shifted maybe 3 feet to the left, to the section of window directly beside the front door. He had both hands flat against the glass now. Not banging, just pressed there. Palms down, fingers spread. And then he started to push. Not violently, steadily, like he was testing whether the glass would give. The window didn't flex. It's thick, old glass, and it's in a solid frame. But watching him push against it with that same blank expression, that same open-mouthed stare, made something in my stomach drop completely. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I told them I had a man outside my bar who was possibly intoxicated and attempting to enter through the window. The dispatcher asked if he had a weapon. I said I didn't know. She said a unit would be there as soon as possible. He was still pushing against the glass when I hung up. I backed away from the bar. There's a hallway in the back that leads to the office and the storage room. I went down it, turned the light on in the office, and sat down with my back against the wall where I could see the hallway, but not the front of the bar. I could still hear the low, irregular knocking from the front. It stopped after a few minutes. I sat there anyway, waiting. A police cruiser pulled up at 3:21 a.m. I know because I checked my phone when I heard the tires on the street. I came out from the back and let the officer in through the side door. He walked the perimeter, checked the front, came back in. The man was gone. What he left behind was... I don't have a great way to describe it. There were 2 handprints on the glass, not greasy or sweaty like you'd expect from someone's palms. They were dark, a brownish dark. The officer said it was probably mud or dirt from his hands. He took a couple of pictures. He asked if I knew the man. I said no. He told me to call back if the guy showed up again and to get home safe. I mopped the floor in about 8 minutes. Fastest I've ever done it. I didn't look at the window while I worked. I don't know who that man was. I don't know where he went. I've worked 6 closing shifts since that night, and I still check the front window before I turn off the bar lights. The handprints were still faintly visible on the glass the next morning. Derek said he'd cleaned them. He didn't. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not the kind of person who panics. I don't scare easy. I walked home alone at night, dozens of times in Syracuse, without thinking twice about it. But that night, I stood with my back against my own front door, listening to a stranger breathe on the other side of the wood. And I was absolutely certain that if I moved, something would come through it. I'm 23. I work at a distribution warehouse outside of Syracuse, New York. early shifts, 6 to 2, so I'm usually in bed by 10. St. Patrick's Day that year fell on a Saturday. My friend Marcus had been pushing me to go out for weeks. I kept saying I wasn't really a bar person. He kept saying it was one night, just come out. So I went. We ended up at a bar on Selena Street called The Anchor. It wasn't really my scene, but it was fine. Marcus knew people there. I had 2 beers over 3 hours, which for me is already a lot. Around 1:30 a.m., Marcus decided he wanted to go to an after-party at someone's apartment. I didn't know these people. I was tired, and I had that low-grade headache that comes from being in a loud place too long. I told him I was heading home. He offered to split an Uber. I checked the app. Surge pricing. It was going to be $26 for a 12-minute ride. I looked it up on Maps. It was a 40-minute walk. I told Marcus not to worry about it. I'd walk. He told me to text him when I got home. I said I would. I didn't, actually. I forgot. I'm getting ahead of myself. I headed south on Selena, then cut west on Colvin toward my apartment building. That stretch of Colvin has a park on one side, Thorndon Park, and residential houses on the other. The streetlights on that block are spaced far apart. Not a great stretch to walk alone at 2 in the morning, but I wasn't really thinking about that when I made the decision. I was thinking about my bed. I was maybe halfway down that block when I noticed the sound. Footsteps. Behind me. I didn't panic. It's a public sidewalk. People walk places. But something made me want to check, so I did that thing where you slow down slightly and listen for whether the steps behind you slow down too. They did. I kept walking. I rounded a slight curve in the sidewalk and glanced back over my shoulder as naturally as I could. There was a man behind me. He was tall. I'm 6 feet, and he looked taller than me from a distance, though it's hard to say for certain in the dark. He was wearing dark pants and a long-sleeved shirt, and on top of his head he had one of those cheap green top hats. The plastic kind that come in bags of 10 from the party store. It was tilted slightly to one side. Under the streetlight, the hat looked almost neon. He was maybe 40, 50 feet behind me. Not close, not running, just walking. I told myself what you tell yourself. Just a guy heading home. Same direction. Means nothing. I sped up slightly. He sped up. I want to be precise about this because I've replayed it a lot. It wasn't like he matched my pace exactly in a theatrical way. It was subtle. If I hadn't been listening for it, I might not have caught it at all. But I was listening, and I did catch it. Every time I added a step to my stride, his footsteps came a fraction faster. I crossed the street. He crossed the street. I stopped at the corner of Colvin and Westmoreland and looked directly back at him. He stopped. He just stood there on the sidewalk, under the gap between 2 streetlights where the light from both barely reached. He was in the darker part of the block, and he wasn't moving. He wasn't trying to walk around me. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't doing anything that a normal person does when they stop on a sidewalk. He was just standing there, looking at me. I started walking again, faster this time. He started walking again. I live about 6 blocks from where I was at that point. I cut through a side street to try to change up my route, Midland Avenue, which is even less lit than Colvin, which in hindsight was a terrible decision. I went anyway because I was operating on something between panic and denial, and I just wanted to get home. I checked behind me twice on Midland. He was there. Same distance, same pace. I pulled out my phone to call Marcus. My hands weren't shaking yet, but my breathing was getting shallow and stupid. Marcus didn't pick up. I didn't leave a message. I pulled up my contacts to find someone else, anyone else, and realized I couldn't think straight enough to decide who to call. I turned onto my street, Fenwick Place. My building is the fourth one on the left. I did not look back. I just walked. Fast. As fast as I could without breaking into a run, because some part of my brain was insisting that if I ran, something worse would happen. I was about 20 feet from my front door when I heard his pace change. Not a few extra steps, a sprint. The sound of his feet went from measured footsteps to something rapid and flat and very deliberate, and he was covering ground fast. I ran. I covered the last 20 feet in maybe 2 seconds. My key was already in my hand. I'd had it out since Midland. And I got the door open, and I threw myself inside, and I shoved it shut, and I hit the deadbolt and the chain in the same motion. And then I stood there with my back against the door. I heard him stop outside. I heard breathing. Heavy, controlled breathing, like someone who had just sprinted but was trying not to sound winded. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. He didn't knock. He didn't say anything either. I stood there for what felt like a very long time, probably 4 or 5 minutes. The breathing was audible for most of it. Then it wasn't. I waited another 10 minutes before I moved away from the door. I went to my front window, which looks out over the street, and I looked out. The sidewalk was empty. I don't know where he went. I don't know what he wanted. He never touched me, never said a word. And when the police took my report the next morning, there wasn't much they could do. No crime had been committed. A man had walked behind me on a public street. I know what I heard outside that door. I know what I felt when his footsteps changed. I texted Marcus when the sun came up. He asked if something had happened. I said I'd tell him later. I still haven't. He asked me to turn off my headlights. We were parked at the end of a gravel road I'd never seen before, in the middle of nowhere, at 1 in the morning. And then he said, "Keep me company for a little while." I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't driven away when I did. I started driving for Lyft about 8 months ago, mostly on weekends to cover the gap between what my day job pays and what my rent costs. You get to know the rhythms pretty fast. New Year's Eve is chaos. Halloween is weird in a fun way, mostly. Super Bowl Sunday is a disaster. St. Patrick's Day is its own category. It was a Sunday that year. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and the Short North neighborhood does a full block party that basically shuts down the main stretch from noon until the bars close. By midnight, the surge multiplier was sitting at 2.8 times. I'd already done about 11 rides. I was tired, but the money was good, and I told myself 1 more hour. That was a mistake. I know that now. I accepted a ride at 1:14 a.m. The pickup was on Buttles Avenue, just at the edge of where the Short North crowd spills out into the quieter residential blocks. The destination showed as a place called Morrow Road, which I didn't recognize. I pulled it up on the map before I confirmed. It was way out east, past Reynoldsburg, past where Columbus really ends and things get sparse. Rural sparse. Rideshare logic says that's fine. Long rides mean more money. Surge pricing on a long ride is very good money. I confirmed it and drove to Buttles. It was raining lightly by then. One of those fine rains that's barely rain. More like the air itself is wet. My wipers were on the lowest setting. I pulled up to the address. I waited. He came from between two parked cars, not from a door or a porch or an alley. From between two parked cars, like he'd been crouching there. He was wearing dark clothing and had a green foam shamrock headband pushed up on his forehead. The kind that light up. But his wasn't lit anymore. It was just sitting there like a limp antenna. He got in the back without saying anything. People do that, especially late-night riders. They get in, they stare at their phone, they pass out. I said, "Hey, heading out to Morrow Road?" just to confirm. Standard thing I do. He said, Not yes, not a nod, which I couldn't have seen anyway. Just, Okay, fine. I pulled away from the curb and headed east on 670. After maybe 5 minutes, he spoke. "Take the local roads." I said the GPS had me on the highway. It would be faster. He said, "I don't like the highway at night." His voice was flat, not slurred the way drunk voices are. Too even. The kind of even where you get the sense that each word was selected. I switched to local roads. Fine. Some people hate highways. Not worth a weird interaction over it. The rain was picking up slightly. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk program, and I turned it down without really deciding to, just as a reflex to the silence in the car. About 10 minutes in, I glanced in the rear view. He was looking directly at me, not at his phone, not out the window, at the mirror, at my eyes in the mirror. I looked back at the road. 30 seconds later, I checked again, still looking. I've had passengers do weird things. I had a guy cry for an entire 40-minute ride and never explain why. I had a woman argue with someone on speaker for an hour. Weird is relative in this job, but there's a specific kind of wrong feeling that you get when something isn't adding up, and your body starts cataloging the details before your brain does. My brain was telling me he's just drunk and quiet. My body was doing something else. He smelled like alcohol, but there was something underneath it that I kept noticing and couldn't name. Something organic. Not bad exactly, just wrong for the inside of a car, like wet soil or like something had been left somewhere damp. We turned off the main road onto Morrow Road, and things got dark fast. No street lights, no other cars, just my headlights and the corn on both sides and the rain on the windshield. He gave me a direction. Left up here. There was no left marked on the GPS. I slowed down and there was a gravel road, barely a road going between two overgrown fields. I said, "That's not showing on my map." He said, "It's just up there, quarter mile." I stopped the car. I said, "I'm going to need the GPS to match before I go down a road I can't see." I heard him exhale, slow, like he was calibrating something. Then he said, "Turn off the headlights. Park here. Keep me company for a little while." I'm not going to try to explain exactly what I felt in that moment in a way that sounds clean, because it wasn't clean. It was immediate and physical, and my hands moved before my brain caught up. I didn't say anything. I put the car in reverse, backed up onto Morrow Road, and I hit the gas. He grabbed the back of my headrest. Not my neck, the headrest. His fingers were right there at the edge of my peripheral vision, gripping the top of the seat. I drove faster. He said something. I don't remember the words. I've tried to, and I can't reconstruct them. It was something that didn't follow a normal sentence structure, and I remember thinking that even in the moment, And then, after maybe 40 seconds, he let go. I didn't stop. I drove until I hit the intersection with Refugee Road, and then I pulled over and I sat there with the hazards on, and I called Lyft support line. My hands were shaking by then. I told them I needed to end the ride immediately due to a safety situation. They walked me through it. They ended the ride on their end, flagged the account. I sat there for another minute. Then I turned on the interior light and looked in the back seat. He had left his shamrock headband. It was on the seat, foam broken in the center, both antennae bent inward. And underneath it was a work glove. One glove, leather, stiff. I have no explanation for the glove. I don't know if he dropped it or left it deliberately. The Lyft investigator asked me the same question when I filed the formal incident report 3 days later. I ended my night there, drove home, locked my car in the garage, sat in my kitchen until it got light outside. I took 2 weeks off from driving after that. I still drive now. Different neighborhood, different hours. But I don't accept rides that go past Reynoldsburg anymore. And I turned off the feature that lets passengers give their destination after pickup. I should have done that a long time ago.